In this third and final part of our series about interest rates, Rich and I are going to touch on a very interesting topic about how you can afford the house that you want to get into over a little bit of time. Great. I think that answers that question. So we can move on to number 4 now. And number 4 is, what if I'm locked into a higher interest rate? Interest rates come down before I close. Can I get my interest rate lower before I close? So let's say right now you're at 7% locked in. Right. 2 months later, interest rates are closer to 6%. Can you get that down before closing? Is that possible? If so, how does that work? Or maybe it's not possible.
Yeah. My best analogy for locking in an interest rate is like buying gasoline. So if you paid $5 per gallon today, and then you drove past that same gas station tomorrow and it was 4 3/4, you can't refill your gas tank.
Darn.
So it's really important that we strategize, when are we locking in that interest rate?
Yeah.
And so in an environment where rates are coming down, we're going to wait as long as possible before we lock in the rate, because we don't want to have to get into that situation. Kind of secondly with that is, I don't see that we're going to see rates going down like quickly.
Like dramatically.
They're just going to trickle down. And that's part of what I was mentioning earlier with the Feds, is they're going to do their best to try to make things as soft of a landing as possible.
Yeah, we've heard that.
And so, yeah, if rates are coming down slowly, that's my best strategy, is just look at it, time it, talk with your realtor, figure out what your target close date is, and make sure that you're getting that.
I think that gives us a solid answer for number 4.
Cool.
So we'll move on to our last question here about interest rates. With high interest rates and high prices, how can I afford the house I want?
Yeah, affordability, I think, has become one of those major questions out there, and especially for your first-time home buyer.
Yeah.
But if you've got somebody that's a move-up buyer, I'll tackle that one first, because maybe a little bit easier. I want to look at their whole financial picture and say, okay, what kind of other expenses do you have? What kind of what's your whole cash flow looking like? And look at the equity that they have in the house that they're trying to sell. And maybe they're sitting on $200,000 in equity, and they only need $150,000 to get that down payment for the next house. Well, what can we do with that other equity is we can consolidate debt. Let's pay off other expenses so that their cash flow, even though they're maybe going from a 3 or a 4% interest rate into the 6s or 7s, their cash flow ends up being the same because we've eliminated other expenses.
What are some recommendation strategies around a high interest, high priced market for that first time home buyer?
Yeah, I think it comes down to just being able to get into real estate. When we look at the long-term trends, we see that real estate appreciates at 4 to 5% nationally every year. And so it's just getting into the real estate. And that might mean getting into a smaller house, but get into what you can afford to then be able to leverage that equity after a few years to then move up into a bigger house.
That's 5 questions that we've been hearing about interest rates. Before we started this video, Rich and I were talking about this could be a 10-part series, and we wouldn't even touch all the elements of interest rates. But hopefully some of these answers in this conversation allowed everyone to know exactly what we're hearing, what we're seeing, and what we're thinking when it comes to interest rates. Rich, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It was super fun, and we'll make sure in the information below you'll have a link to Rich's website so that you can reach out to him if you want to find out what you can afford or any other lender-related questions. And of course, you can reach out to us at Home Oregon Coast for any of your real estate needs. Thanks, everybody.